Hi, I'm Tony from Taylor Dynamometer, Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and I'm service manager there. Today we're going to do some more work on a DX series dynamometer. What we're doing today is changing out the end seal, the inner seal, the bearing, and then we're also going to pull a packing nut out and inspect the packing and show you how to change packing out or add packing. As typically you're going to be adding more than replacing. So we're going to get started on that. There's really nothing to punch. Obviously we've got the coupling off, or the torsional coupling, or the drive coupling off. One thing you may want to do before you get started, and you may want to do this days in advance, is get some penetrating oil and spray your packing nut threads. Start to just soak that down with penetrating oil, and if you do that for 2 or 3 days in advance prior to doing this work, you're going to find that the packing nut's going to come loose a little bit easier. I did do that, and so we're hoping that this comes apart the way it should, the way we like it to. So we'll get started here. We're going to pull the end cap off first, and there's just some Allen head bolts. You really don't have to punch mark this. If you just make a mental note that your vent cap is on the top of the cap, and the oil fill is on the bottom of the cap. And that brings another thing up, is you've got your oilers here. Now I went ahead and removed the oil bulb from the holder, and I also removed the oil line. You might want to do that an hour or so before you do this job. Let this drip and drain out, then the bearing carrier won't have all that oil in it. Put a pan under it, because it'll hold a bit of oil. These usually come apart pretty good, but sometimes you're going to need to get a small screwdriver or a pry bar. Maybe wrap this a couple times with a mallet to knock it loose, and we're going to hope for the best. Yeah, we're going to hope for the best and getting lucky. This has not been apart in a long time, so we're going to slide this off. It's the end cap, and in the end cap you have your oil seal, and you also have a O-ring here, which I will show you the O-ring groove. This actually came out with the end cap. Typically that's in the bearing carrier. All right. But that should be replaced as well. So we're going to set that off to the side and then get cleaned up. Now you got a bearing carrier here, and you can see your oil slinger is in front of the bearing, and you've got a lock washer and a lock nut. So this lock nut is going to have a little tab here that you got to knock over and unlock it so you can get the lock nut loose. All right. Now you could use a chisel to do this, or a drift to knock this spanner nut loose. I like to try to use some type of spanner wrench if possible. You do run into this can be a bit of a bugger. It's nice to have someone helping you with this, so I'm going to need some help here for a second, and fortunately we've got Amy here that can kind of hold things in place. And Amy, if you could just hold that, keep that from turning right about there. Sometimes it takes a little bit to get them loose, but just stay at it, and you will get it. And you got it. There's really no torque setting or anything for it. All right, we got it loose. Thank you, Amy. All right, just spin the nut off, and this nut you're going to want to reuse, and most likely you can use this lock washer too. Typically they're good for a couple uses, and then I'll get cleaned up as well. All right, so now that nut we just took off, that holds a bearing in place. So, and it holds everything together here. So now what we have is a bearing carrier, and this bearing carrier houses an oil slinger, which that can come off with the bearing. And it also on the backside, which you'll see when we get it out, it has the inside oil seal or the inner oil seal. Now we're doing all this with the dynamometer sitting, it's not up on end. I mean, typically when this is done at our factory, we put the dynamometer up on end and we take it apart one piece at a time, and everything holds on center real well. So when you're doing this work, you're really going to need to either have a bridge crane or a jib crane, or even a cherry picker will probably work. And all we want to be able to do is support this shaft after we pull this assembly out. Otherwise, everything's going to tip inside, and we don't want it laying on castings and whatnot. We don't want the shaft laying on those castings. So, all right, so I've got the jacking bolts in. These are just look like a half 13 thread, so a 3/4 inch socket. And what you're going to want to do is thread them in and simply jack the bearing carrier out from the shaft. Now, if you have some all thread this size, it might work a little better because that'll give you more thread to work with. You may, if you're using bolts, you may have to, pull this out as far as you can and then put a spacer, put a piece of key stock or some steel or something behind it. Also, I had mentioned earlier that you need to support the shaft. We're going to rely on the packing and the packing nut to support the shaft while we pull this out. Once this is out, we will have to support the shaft with something in order to get the packing and the packing material out. All right, so I've run the jacking bolts in, and I was able to pull the bearing carrier out. Along with the bearing carrier came the oil slinger, which can be cleaned up and reused. And then, of course, we've got the bearing carrier itself. Now, the bearing carrier will have the shaft bearing in it. It also has between the back shoulder of where the bearing sits and the bearing carrier itself, there's a spacer ring. Now, if you're doing both sides of the dyno, make sure you keep the spacer ring on the right side because they are two different dimensions. So you want to keep it one on the back side, one on the front side. So this bearing is held in with a snap ring. So what we're going to do is we're going to clean this up. We'll pop the snap ring out. We'll knock the bearing out. We'll press a new bearing in and put the snap ring back in. Prior to putting a new bearing in, we'll press a new seal in. We'll knock this old seal out and we'll press in a new oil seal. The seals and the bearings, all those parts are available from Taylor. You call the service department and the guys will help you out and get you the parts you need. Okay, so we've got the end of the dyno opened up really nice, and now is a great time to take a look at your packing, because if you've ever worked on one of these, you're going to know that it's really difficult to add or remove or packing, to service the packing from the access point in the top here. It's really a lot easier to get it from the end. So now is a good time to really do that. So in order to do that, you're going to remove your locking tab. There's a little locking tab that holds a packing nut in place. And hopefully you lube this thing for a couple of days so it comes loose for you. Now if it really gives you a hard time, you can use a spanner wrench if you want. I like to just get a pry bar in there. It seems to work better than a spanner wrench. Now if you're really having a problem with it, you can get your pry bar in and then have another person with a drift wrap on one of the teeth of the packing nut, hammer and a drift or a chisel. Try not to beat it up too bad. You can get a replacement packing nut, but if you don't need to, that's a good thing. Now this is loose. Now if you're not familiar with this, if you've taken on this challenge and you're not real familiar with what the packing nut does, it's actually a graphite impregnated rope packing. and it keeps the water in the dyno. If you see a lot of water leaking from down here, from under this portion of the dyno, typically it's the packing that would be leaking. And if you service the packing and tighten it up, check it every once in a while, it should last for quite a while. It holds up, it can hold up pretty well. But if you do get into this deep into a repair on one of these, I would recommend at least sticking another piece in if you have to. So when you pull a packing nut off, and if the threads are bad, now's a good time to clean them up. Just hit them with a wire brush good, and that can be reused as long as it's not all beat up. So now we've got the packing material, and you can take a peek in with a flashlight and you can see the packing material. We do have this tool. It's a packing removal tool, and it'll help a little bit with getting the packing out, because it can be a struggle sometimes. Now we're at a point right now where the shaft is actually laying on the packing, so we have to get the weight off of that packing so we can pull it out of here. So now is when it comes in handy to have a bridge crane or a jib crane, or well, even a bottle jack with a block of wood or something, you know, that you can get under and lift the thing up. What's nice about doing this procedure, doing the work this way, is a lot of times you can do this work right in your test cell. You don't have to pull a dyno out of the test cell. It'd save a bunch of time, and that's assuming you got enough room to do that. And we're just going to lift it up so you see the shaft move. Come up. And there, it's probably about there. We're gonna try it there, and you can actually, if you can turn, thank you, Amy. If you can turn the shaft a little bit, you know that you've relieved that tension on there. So now you want to kind of look around and see if you can find the seam on the packing, and if you can, that is great, because that's where you want to stick this little corkscrew tool. I think I see it here, so let's give it a shot and see if we can get this out. Okay, now there's going to be 4 pieces of packing in here. If the packing's in really good shape, if the dyno hasn't been leaking, you may not want to mess with it. But if you only have a couple threads left on your packing nut, you're going to want to at least add some. So when you're in this fire, I would probably recommend at least replacing a couple pieces of the packing. Now once you get all the packing out, you're going to want to go in with a little right angle scraper, and you're going to want to be able to clean all the threads out in there, because your packing nut has to spin in by hand, and you should be able to sink that packing nut all the way in, back it out. You know, if it hangs up on the threads, you don't know if you're really putting the pressure on the packing or not. So this one is really coming apart pretty nicely. The second piece is already on its way out. Work on that. And the seams, when this packing's installed, the seams should be staggered about 90 degrees from one another. So that seems to seal up a little bit better. And you can see it takes a little muscle to get it out once in a while, but that actually did break it loose. So, all right, so we've got the packing removed. We're going to go ahead and clean everything up. I'm going to press some bearings into place. I'm going to press some seals in place, and we will put a couple pieces of packing in and put it back together. So we'll be right back with that. Tony here from Taylor Dynamometer. I'm the service manager over there. We're in Milwaukee, Wisconsin at the factory. We're finishing up the bearing replacement and packing inspection on this old DX, and we've got all the parts cleaned up. I went ahead and pressed new seals in the end cap, in the back of the bearing carrier, and I also put a new bearing in from Taylor here, along with a new O-ring. So this is all cleaned up and ready to go back in. But before we put that back together, I do want to show you how to put the packing in. So we're going to go ahead and get a piece of packing. And again, as I mentioned earlier, it's pre-cut when you get it from us. It's got a beveled edge on it. And when you slide it in from the end here. And again, when you put more than one piece in, make absolute sure that the seams are staggered, about 90 degrees. If you do not do that, you will most likely end up with a leak. And the last thing you want to do is, after pulling this all apart, is to end up with a leak. You can use a punch or whatever you got handy to get it started, all right? Now, once you get it started, what I like to do, a little trick that seems to come in handy, is I actually use the packing nut. It takes a little bit of time, but it works quite well. I like to use the packing nut to actually push that packing into place. Now this packing nut, I cleaned this up as well, and also I coated it. I put a nice coating of Never-Seize, of an anti-seize compound on the threads. And remember, before I did this, I cleaned all these threads out, so this packing nut spun in and out very nicely. So we're going to go ahead and put this packing nut in and push it in. In order to do that, we're going to have to carefully drop the shaft. Thank you, Amy. And we'll slide the packing nut in place. And we're going to pick the shaft back up again. Yep. And again, we just want to pick it up with enough tension. You can see the shaft move a little bit. And if you can turn it, that means you're suspending the shaft, and you should be pretty well centered. Now, getting the packing nut started might be a challenge because the shaft really isn't supported other than with this strap right here from the crane. So if you struggle a little bit getting it started, that's pretty normal. And you may have to raise the crane up a little bit more, or you might have to drop it down. But you'll feel it when it catches. And there we go, it's caught. So I'm just spinning this packing nut in now, and as I do this, it's pushing the packing, the new piece of packing, in, and it'll push it in nice and square and flat, so it's going to seal up properly. I like to help it along a little bit, get it in so you got a little tension on it to compress it before you put the next piece in. When the packing nut snugs up a little bit, you can go ahead and back the packing nut out. Put your next piece of packing in, and go ahead and run the packing in again. Now, like I said, there's usually 4 pieces in this assembly, and the fourth piece is a little tough to get in sometimes. So pushing these in as far as you can to begin with is helpful. So let's spin this out by hand now. All right, so the last of the packing's been installed, and it's time to go ahead and put the bearing carrier back in. So again, we're going to rely on the packing and the packing nut to support the shaft right now. We're going to go ahead and gently drop it down. I really didn't see it move much there. And what helps with this is to have, if you can make yourself up a couple of little guide bolts. You just take some bolts and cut the heads off and grind them flush, and this helps a little bit getting things aligned. The bearing carrier, like I said, it's ready to go. It's got the new seal installed in the back side. It's got the bearing in. It's got the snap ring in. Of Of course, I put the spacer ring back where it came from. Pay attention to that. Do not forget that spacer ring. You'll run into problems without it. And this isn't keyed. You can put it in at any rotation. So we're going to go ahead and slide this in. Line it up with my bolts here. All right. And we're going to put our strap back under it, and we're going to pick up, because this bearing actually will position the shaft in the housing. So we want to, again, lift the shaft up until you see the assembly move a little bit, and get it started. All right, so you get it lined up, and use a dead blow on this. And what you're going to do is basically tap that bearing carrier in and just work back and forth, because you do have a bearing there. And once you get it started, you can get the strap out of the way, and we should be able to do that at this point. Let's give it a shot and see what happens. Or again, if you have all thread, you can run some all thread in here, some long bolts, and just pull it in with the bolts. That's it. Use 3 bolts, and you can pull it in nice and even. Now, once you get it in far enough, I would recommend getting your bolts here and just thread those in. And remove your guides. And always put 3 bolts in. Don't try to do it with 2 of them. Now, before you put this assembly in, make sure you grease that new seal. Put a little bit of grease on the lip of that seal, so you don't have a dry startup on it. Help it last a little longer and seat better. Alright, so that's seated. We're good there. Now it's time to put the oil slinger back on. So we've cleaned that up. That goes back on. Our lock washer and our lock nut go on. I don't really have a torque spec for this lock nut. I'm just going to spin it on, and you're going to snug it up good with either a drift or a spanner wrench. What we're going to do is actually use a drift here to tighten it up a little bit, and we'll line it up with one of the tabs on the lock nut and fold the ear on the lock nut over. Alright, and we're lined up nicely with an ear. And we're going to fold that over. Alright. We're just about there. Maybe put a little bit of O-ring lube on this O-ring and put it in the O-ring groove. Alright. And a new seal's been pressed into the end cap, and that goes in next. And just to make things a little bit easier here, I'm going to use my alignment bolts, which I've got right here. Put those back in. They come in handy to have. You might want to make yourself up a set of them. And when we just slide this on, again, we're going to want to put a coat of grease on this seal. We got that taken care of. Put this on with the vent cap up. Try not to bang around on the seal too much. And slide that up. And reinstall the hardware. All right, got everything back in place here. So now what you're going to want to do is, I would recommend it whenever you do this, you're going to want to replace the oil hose, the oil line here, from the oiler to the holder here, down to your bottom of your end cap. You don't want to use your old hose; it's going to be dirty. And you put fresh oil, clean out your oiler cup, put fresh oil in. I believe we recommend just straight 10 weight works just fine for this. Go ahead and put your oiler cup back into the holder and let it sit for I would let it sit for a good 6 or 8 hours, and then come back and refill it. It's got to fill up that bearing carrier. Bearing carrier will fill up, this level will come down, refill it. You'll be good to go. Make sure you inspect for leaks, and make sure you're all sealed up and tight. You go ahead and put your coupling back on, and you'll be in business to get going. I hope this information has helped, and if you have any questions, tackle this project. Is this something that you can do pretty easily in your shop? You have any questions at all, please call us at area code 414-755-0040. Press 2 for parts and service. Either myself or one of the guys will pick up. Be happy to answer any questions. Thanks for watching.